Storytelling. How are you doing today? Hello, welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading the Bronze Bow and the Bible. We're going to be finishing the Bronze Bow today. And we're going to be finishing a book in the Bible, right?
Nope.
Oh, we already finished one.
We finished Mark last time.
We finished Mark last time, so I'm sorry that we haven't been able to do this in a while. Cause
we did it 2 days ago.
Yeah, I know, but we haven't been able to do it.
Get out of my seat. Go.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, JJ. Did you get the wet food for Mom?
Mom told him to do it.
Hi. So, welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. So we are going to start a new book in the Bible. We'll take the ribbon out of the back end of the Bible and put it somewhere in the front. And I have selected we're having some mass pandemonium in the other room. Thank you, Kimberly. You're so nice. Kimberly's a really great person, but she's not feeling very well today. So
I'm sick today.
Sick, but not super sick. So, all right. So, our next book in the Bible. Who's my one person? Is that Mom? I bet it's Mom. I don't have any comments, but I bet that it's Mom. Okay, so the book in the Bible that we will be reading today is Judges. All right, so let's just go ahead and start with Judges chapter 1. After the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, "Who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites, to fight against them?" The Lord said, "Judah shall go up. Behold, I have given the land into his hand." And Judah said to Simeon his brother, "Come up with me into the territory allotted to me, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I likewise will go with you into the territory allotted to you." So Simeon went with him. Then Judah went up, and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they defeated 10,000 of them at Bezek. They found Adoni-Bezek at Bezek, and fought against him, and defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they pursued him, and caught him, and cut off his thumbs and his big toes. And Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table, as I have done, so God has repaid me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. And the men of Judah fought against Jerusalem, and captured it, and struck it with the edge of the sword, and set the city on fire. And afterward the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who lived in the hill country, in the Negev, and in the lowland. And Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. And the name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba. And they defeated Shishai and Ahiman and Talmai. From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kiriath Sepher. And Caleb said, "He who attacks Kiriath Sepher and captures it, I will give him Achsah, my daughter, for a wife." And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it, and he gave him Achsah, his daughter, for a wife. When she came to him, she urged him to ask her father for a field, and she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Give me a blessing. Since you have set me in the land of the Negev, give me also springs of water." And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. And the descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up with the people of Judah from the city of palms into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the Negev near Arad. And they went and settled with the people. And Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they defeated the Canaanites who inhabited Zephath, and devoted it to destruction. So the name of the city was called Hormah. Judah also captured Gaza with its territory, and Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. And the Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country. But he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain, because they had chariots of iron. And Hebron was given to Caleb, as Moses had said, and he drove out from it the 3 sons of Anak. But the people of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites had lived with the people of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. The house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And the house of Joseph scouted out Bethel. Now the name of the city was formerly Luz. And the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, "Please show us the way into the city, and we will deal kindly with you." And he showed them the way into the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword. But they let the man and all his family go. And the man went to the land of the Hittites and built a city and called its name Luz. That is its name to this day. Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in the land. When Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not drive them out completely. And Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, so the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron or the inhabitants of Nahalal, so the Canaanites lived among them, but became subject to forced labor. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko, or the inhabitants of Sidon, of Ahlab, or of Akzib, or of Helba, or of Afik, or of Rehob. So the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, or the inhabitants of Beth Anath. So they lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath became subject to forced labor for them. The Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the plain. The Amorites persisted in dwelling in Mount Herzis, in Ajalon, and in Shaalbim, but the hand of the house of Joseph rested heavily on them, and they became subject to forced labor. And the border of the Amorites ran from the ascent of Akrabim from Selah and upward. And that is the end of chapter 1. And we will read tomorrow about Israel's disobedience and how God raises up a series of judges, obviously one at a time, to lead his people through that time period. Okay, so we've got a lot of comments here. Granny Bear says, "Hi, JJ. Hi, David. Hi, how are you doing?" Rebecca says, "Hi." Hi, Rebecca. Mom says, "Who needs thumbs and toes?" Obviously not that dude. He didn't need them. Something about O'Keefe's. I'm not sure what that is. Something Irish, it looks like. Mom doesn't look like she knows what that is either. And then Granny Bear clarifies for dry, cracked skin of toes and thumbs. Okay. Does anyone understand the reason why why they were supposed to drive the Gentiles out? Hmm. I wonder. Maybe that's what the rest of the book is about. Anyway, I thought that this chapter was particularly interesting because it is the follow up to the book of Joshua, which obviously we didn't read. But in the book of Joshua, there, especially some of the chapters, it's a lot of numbers and a lot of genealogies and that sort of thing. And so I thought that Judges would be more interesting to read. But so here we are, and or at least to read out loud. I think that we should read the whole Bible, but I think Judges will be more interesting to read out loud in this setting. So now we're going to finish the bronze bow. We don't have a synopsis today because unfortunately our synopsis giver is not feeling well, as we mentioned earlier. But in the last episode, let's see, Joel came to visit Daniel. He said, hey, you need to warn that Jesus fellow because I think there's some people that want to hurt him. So Daniel went to go talk to Jesus. His disciples didn't want him to go near him because he was tired, but Jesus saw him anyway. And Jesus was really um, compassionate, I think, to Daniel, and also gave him a lot of stuff to think about. And he said, I made a vow before God. Is not a vow sacred to live and die for God's victory? And Jesus said, that is not a vow of hate. Go in peace, my son. You are not far from the kingdom. And what's the next thing that happened? Well, Daniel found out that his sister had been his sister that doesn't talk to anyone had been talking to that Roman person, and for a long period of time, over periodically since the last summer. And of course, Daniel kind of threw up about it and probably really hurt his sister in the process, is my thought. Okay, so maybe I just understated that. What's up with Kimmy? She is not feeling well. She has allergy-like symptoms, but they're pretty bad. So we think that it might be like a mildish flu kind of thing. I don't think that she does not have a fever, so that's good. So anyway, yes, go ahead. And now we're going to start chapter 23. We have 2 chapters to go tonight, and we will conclude the book, The Bronze Bow. The Bronze Bow. There it is. All right. Chapter 23. In a few moments, he, Daniel, had undone the work of months. Overnight, Leah had become again the wan ghost who had cowered beside her dying grandmother. She did not comb her golden hair or sweep the floor or speak. She did not seem to recognize her loom. All day she sat with her head bowed and her hands idle. It was as though everything that had happened since the day of Daniel's homecoming had never been, except that one thing had changed. Now, above all else, she feared him. In a torment of remorse, Daniel did all the work about the house, the sweeping and washing and baking. He steeled himself against her constant trembling and the cringing whenever he came through the door. When she refused to notice her food so long as he was in the room, he left the bowl on the mat beside her. Sometimes when he returned, it was half empty. More often, it was untouched. He pleaded with her very gently. He was more patient than he had ever imagined. He was capable of being. But her eyes, when he glimpsed them rarely, were like empty windows. Okay. He dreaded to look lest he should see the demons staring out of them. He was sure now that they possessed her completely. Just when the hope of Jesus began to work in him, he did not know. Just when the hope of Jesus began to work in him, he did not know. It began as a small flicker in the darkness of his mind. All day at the forge, the hope grew slowly till it filled his every thought. They say that Jesus could cast out demons, demons so terrible that they made a man tear his own flesh. Could he cast out the silent demons too, those that hid themselves deep in the shadows? Could he ask anything of Jesus when he had refused to follow him? And did he dare to ask Jesus to help Leah when he knew in his heart that he himself was to blame that the demons had come back? Yet he remembered how Jesus, in a way he had never understood, had somehow lifted from him the terrible weight of Samson's death. If only he could take to Jesus this heavier burden of guilt. In the sleepless hours he forgot the doubts that he had confessed him the night on the rooftop. He remembered only the infinite kindness of the teacher's eyes. He did not think that Jesus would turn him away. There came an afternoon when his mind was suddenly made up. He laid down his hammer and took the road to Capernaum. He reached the city toward evening and made his way at once to the shore. The fishing boats were deserted. A single aged man, his crutches beside him, stared out over the water. "They have all gone," he whined. "Not a thought for us who couldn't walk." "Gone where?" "Who knows?" the man sighed. "They have been gone all day. They followed the master. A great crowd of them. He went out in the boat and Andrew rowed him across the lake. The people ran after him along the shore. Hundreds of them. I couldn't keep up." "Which way?" "To the west, toward the plain." Daniel hurried away. He was in no mood to wait, especially in this dismal company. He would go out to meet the returning crowd. For the first time, he understood why they had refused to be left behind. This time, he wanted something himself, and he knew their impatience. It was not hard to follow the route they had taken along the rocky shore path. He began to realize, as one excited person after another pointed the way, that a very large crowd had passed by, and that many along the shore must have dropped their work and followed after. He saw before them a barren rise of hills. The light was failing fast, but he could just distinguish a great mass of people, more than he had ever seen before in one place, clotted like a vast herd of sheep on the slope. What were they doing there so late? Presently the sound of their voices reached him like the roar of the sea in the storm, louder and louder, swelling wave on wave. The master must be through speaking, for no one could possibly make himself heard over such a tumult. Above the roar he caught an occasional scream, hysterical, high-pitched. He had never heard a sound quite like this. His heart began to pound. He caught up finally with the rear of the crowd. They were all on their feet, pushing, shoving, craning their necks with a frenzy he had never seen before. Up ahead, their voices rose in a sort of chant. "What is it?" He caught the arm of the man nearest him. "Why are they shouting? Why? Where are your wits, boy?" "I've just come. Tell me. It's the Messiah. Listen." As he grasped the words, his heart gave a great leap. "Hosanna! Blessed is he that cometh!" Over and over and over and over. "It is the day of the Lord!" screamed a voice above all the rest. "He has declared himself," Daniel thought with rapture, forgetting Leah, forgetting his exhaustion and doubt, forgetting everything but the fierce joy that shook him from head to foot. "Did he tell you?" he demanded, still clutching the man's arm. "Tell me, what did he say?" "Say? He did better than say. He fed us. Don't you see the bread? Pick some up for yourself. There's plenty." The man shook himself loose. "Praise be!" he shouted, pushing forward. "Salvation is come." Daniel looked down. He saw a glimmer of white on the ground and stooped to it. Bread. He held it in his hand. Farther on, he saw another crust and another. Bread? For all these people? People all over the hillside. There must be thousands. Wait a minute. He ran after the men. Where did the bread come from? How do I know? All I know is they sent back word for us to sit down. Then someone passed me bread. The shouting was growing more frenzied. Let him be king, they screamed. He is our deliverer. Down with Rome. Still, Daniel could not see Jesus. He began to push his way through the jostling bodies. If only Joel were here, he thought with sharp regret. The end of all their waiting, and Joel was not there to see it. Daniel! Out of the darkness came a familiar voice. Simon? The two friends grasped each other's arms. Where is he, Simon? He is gone. Gone? They're going to crown him king. I know, but he is gone. We pleaded with him, but he told us to hold back the crowd, and then he went with Simon and James and John. Where? Back into the hills somewhere. We must go after him. Hurry! We will not find him. He said that no one was to follow him. Daniel rocked back from the words as from a wall. Baffled, he stood quivering, his eyes straining ahead. Where could he look in the darkness? Numb with disappointment, he stared at his friend. Then he realized that all around him, like a bonfire that had leapt too high, the exultation was dying down. Shouts of joy were giving way to cries of anger. Like Daniel, the people could not believe that Jesus had gone. He must be hiding, waiting to be coaxed. Here and there, fierce sudden arguments broke out. If the man wanted to be king, why didn't he stand up and act like a king? Women threaded through the crowd, searching out their men and urging them to go home. Slowly, the tide turned back down the hill. Come, said Simon quietly. You can spend the night with me. Simon, why? Daniel burst out. They would have given him a crown. I don't know. Perhaps it is not time. When will there ever be a better time? That is for him to choose. But will he? What does he want? What sort of man is he, anyway? Simon looked back at him. In the darkness, his eyes suddenly blazed. I believe he is the Messiah sent from God, he said. Daniel felt a chill along his spine. Has he said so? Not to me. Perhaps to those three. I think Simon knows. Then why would he not be king? I have told you. I don't know. If he is the Messiah, how soon will he lead us against the enemy? Simon walked on for a time without answering. Finally he spoke. He will never lead us against Rome, Daniel. I have given up all hope of that. The quiet words had the force of a blow. Daniel had his answer at last. Joel had tried to tell him, and Thasia, even Jesus himself. Now Simon had confirmed the doubt that all these months had blocked the way between him and the man from Nazareth. Then why do you stay with him? All the boy's bitterness broke through the reproach. Where else could I go? Simon answered. What has he offered you that is worth more than Israel's freedom? He has offered me the kingdom. Daniel's anger was rising. When do you think you'll have this kingdom? You will not understand this, said Simon. In a way, I have it already. That's fine. The boy's scorn was close to tears. You have the kingdom. You can shut your eyes while all around you. I have not shut my eyes, said Simon. I know well enough that nothing in Israel has changed. But I know that it will be, even if I never live to see it with my own eyes. Listen to me, Daniel, he went on. You've seen him caring for those people, the ones so low that no one, not I or anyone else, cared what happened to them. When I see that, I know that the God of Israel has not forgotten us. Or why would he have sent Jesus to them instead of the rich and the learned? Like a shepherd, he says, who will not let any of his sheep be lost. I'm a poor man and ignorant, but I know now that with a God like that, I am safe." Daniel stood staring at his friend. Simon had lost his senses altogether. "Safe? Jesus has put you all in danger." Simon's voice was steady. "Jesus has taught us that we must not be afraid of the things that men can do to us. Suppose they put chains on all of you and drag you off to prison. He says that the only chains that matter are fear and hate, because they chain our souls. If we do not hate anyone and do not fear anyone, then we are free." "Free? In chains? Simon, you know what they could do to you. How could you possibly not be afraid?" "I don't say I am not afraid," said Simon, "but Jesus is not, and he is the hope of Israel." "What has he done to prove it?" "How do you know you're not risking your life for nothing?" "We can never know," Simon answered slowly. "God hides the future from man's eyes. We are forced to choose, not knowing. I have chosen Jesus." This was his chance tonight. "Do you think he will ever do anything now?" "I don't know what he will do. It is enough for me that he has promised." "It is not enough for me," Daniel cried. "Promises are easy. They are nothing but words. I want a leader who will make his promises good." He flung himself away from Simon and stumbled ahead into the darkness. He could not see his way, but he knew that from now on he was alone. There was no friend to fight beside him. There was no leader to follow. There was nothing left to him but his hatred and his vow. Chapter 24. Spring burst over Galilee. The curtain of rain drew back from a clear, brilliant blue sky. The rich green slopes dropped down to a gentle sea. Flowers flowed along the roadways, trickling through every crevice in the rocky banks, splashing the gray mud walls, spraying from thatched roofs, washing in a wave of color up to the door of the house. But the door was shut against them. Inside the shop, Daniel worked steadily with a grim, averted face. In the gloom of the house, Leah sat, her hands idle in her lap. Dust gathered on the threads of the loom. They were both alike, Daniel thought, turning his back on the blossoming roadway. They could not learn to hope again. Yet he was still stronger than Leah. While she had lost everything, purpose remained to him. His hatred was as strong as ever, so strong that unless he found some outlet for it soon, it would destroy him. He was like a man imprisoned in a pit, raging and helpless. If he were free, he could find a band of zealots. They existed everywhere in Galilee. I'll wait for you, Kimmy. If he were free, he could find a band of zealots. They existed everywhere in Galilee. Men spoke of them furtively. In some village, in some cave in the wilderness, men gathered and made ready, and they would welcome him. But he was chained to his forge in an endless round of work to keep alive a girl who was indifferent that she lived. And even if he found a band, how could he recognize a man whom he could trust? How could he be sure that he would not be duped again? He trains my hands for war, so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. What use were his strong hands? God did not mean the bow of bronze for him. In the first month of spring, Leah was betrayed by the one remaining thing to which she still reached out. The little goat failed her. The kid, which was born in Adar, was puny, and brought only the lowest price, and when it was taken from her, the goat drooped. The milk she gave scarcely provided Leah with a cupful once a day. There came a morning when the little creature could not stand on its feet. Daniel looked at it with dismay, remembering that goats were subject of a peculiar fever. He brought it into the house and tried to coax it to eat. The little goat huddled beside Leah as unresponsive as its mistress. 2 mornings later, it was dead. He thought at first that Leah refused to eat from grief, but that he soon recognized that she too was feverish. She lay on the rush mat, her eyes glazed and unaware, her cheeks flushed, her lips parched. From time to time she cried out in terror. She seemed to be wandering in a distant country, peopled with dreadful shapes he could not even imagine. By the next morning he saw that she was very ill. The physician, loath at first to come, looked down at her and shook his head. There was too little blood in that thin body already, he said, laying aside the bottle of leeches. He left a concoction of rue and departed with a resigned shrug of his shoulders and a gentle pity in the wise eyes behind their wrinkled lids. I cannot work today. My sister has the fever, Daniel told a customer, and bolted the shop door as the man backed away. Word must have gone quickly through the village because no other customer came to trouble him. He sat beside Leah's mat, bewildered. One by one, they had all left him. Everyone who had touched his life, Rosh, Samson, Joel, Thacia, Simon, Jesus. Now Leah was slipping away. With Leah's death he would be altogether free, but freedom seemed suddenly a terror of emptiness, and he had nothing to fill it but hatred. Leah, too, he thought dully, must be avenged. In the stillness, the words came back to him. Can you repay love with vengeance? Leah had loved him with a simple, trustful heart, as Samson had loved him, but vengeance was all he had to give. It was better than nothing. Leah, like Samson, had perished by the sword he had meant for Rome, and like Samson, she would not leave a single person on earth save himself who would know or care. Then he remembered that this was not true. Thacia would care. Sometime during the day he became convinced that Thacia would know. There was nothing that she could do for Leah now, but he knew that she would care. How could he let her know? He remembered the message that Simon had sent him almost a year ago. Rummaging in his shop, he found a bit of broken pottery and scratched with a nail the same message Simon had sent. Leah is dying. Jockton sat outside the shop half-heartedly filing down a set of nails. He had no more than glimpsed the girl who lay dying, but the heaviness inside the house seeped through the door and made him uneasy. He was glad enough for an errand to do. Daniel gave him the directions to the house of Hezron in Capernaum and told him to leave the message with the porter at the door. Jockton did not return. 3 times a day Daniel went to the village well to get water, using it recklessly to bathe Leah's hands and face. He came and went with his head bent, looking at no one, speaking to no one. On the second day, as he came slowly back along the street, he saw the Roman soldier Marcus standing before his house. He stood still, his legs suddenly weak. A red mist blurred his vision. His arms trembled till he could scarcely hold the water jug. Here, in this one hated figure, was concentrated all the misery of his life. With all the strength of his being, he wanted to hurl himself at the Roman boy, to feel the throat between his hands, to hear the life gasping out. But something held him back. He could not kill the Roman while he could not kill the Roman while Leah lay dying inside the house. It would have to wait. Marcus stepped forward to stand between him and the door, and Daniel was forced to stop. He could not prevent the soldier from speaking to him, but he turned his face away. When, against his will, he had to see why no words came, he saw the boy's face was contorted in an effort to speak. I have heard you say that your sister is ill, he stammered. How does she today? Daniel spat on the ground. He charged forward so fiercely that Marcus involuntarily stepped out of the way and let him enter his house. On the doorstep, Daniel turned. What is it to you if another Jew is dying? He snarled. On the third day of Joseph's absence, Daniel came back from the well slowly, his limbs dragging with weariness, heavy with dread that Leah's anguished breathing might have stopped while he was gone. He took no notice of the soldier who stood across the road, and as he had stood for the past 2 days, every hour that boy had off duty he spent simply standing there in the blazing sunshine with his eyes on the house. This time, however, Daniel saw that the Roman was crossing the road and waiting for him, as he had before between the road and the door. I must speak to you, Marcus said as Daniel halted. Daniel did not look up. You hate me, the boy said. I understand your hate. I am German. My people were conquered by Rome. You serve them, said Daniel with scorn. The soldier shrugged. All of my tribe are fighters. At the end of my term, I will be a Roman citizen. You should have died first. The boy flushed under his smooth, tanned skin. I tell you, I understand your hate, he snapped, but I command you to listen to me. Daniel said nothing, waiting. My cohort is transferred. Tomorrow I leave for Corinth. I pray the gods I never set eyes on your country again. Daniel's quick burst of fury died back in helplessness. Even vengeance was snatched from him. Now he would never feel this man's life between his hands. Your sister was the only good thing in this rotting land. I will never see her again. Even if she were not a Jew, a legionary is forbidden to marry. I want to see her before I go. One moment, that is all. Thunderstruck, Daniel looked directly at the boy before him. That a Roman should bend his pride to speak to a Jew, then the very humbleness of the request maddened him the more. His contempt overflowed. If you could save my sister's life, I would not profane our house, he said. I would rather let her die. Understand this. If you try to walk through that door, I will kill you. Marcos was still a soldier. His face went white, his eyes glinted with steel, and his hand moved of its own accord to his side. The two young men stood eye to eye, neither one of them giving way. Then the Roman heeled about and strode away, his shoulders rigid. If she is dead, Daniel thought, I will go after him now. I will have that at least. Leah still lived, but barely. She did not know that he had returned. She lay silent with no strength to cry out against the demons. She had surrendered to them utterly. In the afternoon heat, Daniel must have slept a little. Sleeping and waking were all one endless sameness. But a sound brought his head up, and he saw the door of his house opening. Framed in it against the sunlight stood Jesus in his white robe. Dazed, Daniel struggled to his feet. Jesus moved through the door, touching with his fingers the mezuzah as he passed. Behind him came Thasia. Jesus did not speak. He moved quietly to Leah's mat and stood looking down at her. Thasia came swiftly to Daniel's side. We were away, she whispered, with Joel in Jerusalem. Joktan just found me this morning. Daniel scarcely heard her. He saw only that luminous figure. Jesus had come. He struggled to believe Jesus had come to his house. He wanted to cry out to him, to go down on his knees, but he was afraid. Something about the quietness of Jesus held him silent. Jesus sat down beside Leah and motioned for Daniel and Thasia to sit also at the other side of the room. Then he bent his head and covered his face with his hand and seemed to rest. If I could speak to him, Daniel thought with longing, if I could tell him it is my fault, that I have done this to Leah. Although he held his breath and made no sound, Jesus raised his head, and his eyes met Daniel's. There was no need to speak. Jesus knew. He understood about Leah. He knew that Daniel had rejected him. His eyes, searching and full of pity, looked deep into the boy's and saw the bitterness and the hatred and the betrayed hopes and the loneliness. And then he smiled. Unable to endure that smile, Daniel bent his head. Suddenly, with the longing that was more than he could bear, he wanted to stop fighting against this man. He knew that he would give everything he possessed in life to follow Jesus. Even his vow, he tried to cling again to the words of David that had always strengthened him. He trains my hands for war. But Jesus said that the victory was God's promise. He called men to make ready their hearts and minds instead. Was it possible that only love could bend the bow of bronze? He sat trembling, glimpsing a new way that he would never see clearly or understand. We can never know, Simon had said. We have to choose, not knowing. To know Jesus would be enough, almost with the thought that Almost with the thought, the terrible weight was gone. In its place, a strength and sureness and a peace he had never imagined flowed around him and into his mind and his heart. After a long time, he felt Thasia's hand close over his own. He raised his head and saw tears on her face. Look, she whispered. He had forgotten Leah. Now, seeing how still she lay, he thought that she must have died. Jesus had risen and stood looking down at her. Then, as Daniel watched, he saw her eyelids move and lift falteringly. The blue eyes were blank, as though she came from a deep sleep. She looked up into the master's face, and slowly her eyes filled with wonder. Jesus, she breathed. Into Jesus' face came the old smile with which he had so often looked at the children who crowded around him. It is all right? She whispered. It is all right, Jesus answered. Do not be afraid. With a sob, Daniel stumbled forward to his knees, hiding his face, feeling the tears he had never known since his childhood, not on the night of his father's death or in all the years between, hot and liberating against his hands. He thought he felt a touch on his shoulder. When he lifted his head, Jesus was gone. He saw Thasia, her own tears shining on her cheeks, her eyes like stars. Daniel? Leah said very faintly, not daring to speak. He reached out and touched his sister's hand. I know how she felt, she whispered. The girl, Jairus' daughter, you told me about. I know too, he said humbly. He heard Thasia catch her breath and turned and looked into her eyes. He knew he was not worthy of the gift he saw there, but he knew that at last he was free to offer her all that he had in return. In that one brief look, they made a new vow together. How light it is, Leah murmured, even with Jesus gone. Gone? In sudden realization, Daniel sprang to the door. He could see Jesus far down the street, already half hidden by the people who had always gathered wherever he went. I must go after him, he cried. Before anything else, I must thank him. He flung himself out the doorway and stopped. Across the street, the Roman soldier stood alone under the broiling sun. Haltingly, Daniel walked, not after Jesus, but across the road, till he stood before the boy. He had to try twice before the words would come out. My sister will get well, he said, his voice harsh. The fever has left her. A quick guttural sound burst from the soldier. Daniel looked away. Who could believe that a Roman— I think she would want to say goodbye to you, he said. The soldier waited, not understanding. Daniel looked down the road and caught the white flash of Jesus' robe. Then he straightened his shoulders. Will you come into our house? He asked. And that is the end of the book, The Bronze Bow. The end. So, tomorrow we will begin a new book. And we haven't completely decided what that book will be. More to follow. So I hope that you enjoyed the ending of The Bronze Bow. I'm waiting. I can hear my voice in the other room, and when I stop hearing it, then I'll know that it's finished. Oh, I think I'm done. All right. So I hope that you are enjoying our reading together. I want to continue doing this. Tomorrow we're going to start a new book. Sometime around the 1st of January, we're planning to begin The Hobbit, which will be the 2021 experience, and I don't know how long all of that will last, but we do plan to read The Hobbit and all of Lord of the Rings within that calendar year, and I'm looking forward to that. So I try to get my voices into it. We might intersperse them with other stuff so that it's not quite so heavy. Alrighty, well, I hope that y'all have a good night, and we will see you again later. And oh, Kimmy said wait. Here she comes. Not exactly sprinting, but here she comes. Oh, do you have a picture?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to see it. Yeah. So that's an one. Yay. I'll get me out of the picture. I wish I could get Kimmy in the picture. All right. Nope, I don't think it's going to work out, Kimmy.
Yep.
All right. So there you go. All right. Good night, everybody. We'll see you later. Love you guys. Bye.